Today we're talking about this one, number 50, The Ultimate. This is a Kimberly Morris one. Kimberly Morris's previous two books were The Arrival, book 38, and book 48, The Return. Both books that I gave 10 out of 10 to. And I apologise if there's banging, it's fireworks night. And now my fiance's yelling at me, so background noises are plenty. Now, before I actually get into this book, I am going to have to reanalyse book 48. Yes, I'm going to have to do another review for that one. Why? Because this book has a passage in it which, I'm sorry to say this, but proves me wrong. Because in book 48, I got to the end of it and I thought, this is most surely an entire dream sequence, much like book 41 was. I assumed all of the stuff with Crayak and Drode and David was a Rachel dream. And I gave my reasonings for why I came to that conclusion, and I was pretty happy with that conclusion. But this book proves me wrong, because Cassie at one point talks about how she met David again and had to deal with him, in a way. Now, she didn't straight up say, oh, everything happened. It was basically that. She had seen David again and dealt with him. And she also mentioned Crayak being there. So I am going to have to delve into it. There may still be like a really weird dream sort of thing going on, but I am going to have to reanalyze it because my score for that book, a perfect 10 out of 10, was partly based on that being a dream. So I'm going to have to go back and redo it. When I do it, I'm not sure, but just be prepared for that when it eventually comes. With that out of the way, let's talk about The Ultimate. Kimberly Morris is a very good writer. There are a couple of grammatical errors in here, but nothing to really get wound up about. The pacing is a big fault of this book. Personally, it's probably the biggest fault of this book. The first half, fantastic pacing. Nothing wrong with it at all, as far as I'm concerned. But the second half of this book, the pacing is a little bit off, and we'll get into more details about that. But that's commenting on Kimberly Morris's writing, which, as always for the most part, in her previous books as well, pretty spot on. So let's get into the plot. We start with Cassie in a trench, and there are a Hawk-Bajir around, the other animals are here, there and everywhere. And there are two Hawk-Bajir that stomp down into this trench. And I'm thinking, why don't these Hawk-Bajir do anything? They just sort of look down at Cassie and do nothing. But she escapes, goes through a pipe, comes up the other end, and the Animorphs are there in their battle morphs, and Cassie demorphs from cockroach. And then suddenly, two Hawk-Bajir step forward, and one of them is Toby, and she says, "You are all dead." What they've been doing is a training exercise, and I love this. I love this. We've never really seen this happening with the Animorphs before in this series, where they're doing like training exercises. But obviously now that they're with the Hawk-Bajir, and they've got all these trenches, they're doing like escape routes and things like that. But Toby says, you failed, you'd all be dead if the Urks had attacked and you'd gone through things like that. Jake is angry at Cassie because she took too long to get through this pipe to the other side of it, and she demorphed when she wasn't given the cue. This, I believe, is quite important because as much as this is a Cassie narration, and the final Cassie narration, I will point out, this book is largely about Jake. Cassie does play into it, and I think these two characters have become so intertwined that it being a Jake book is largely influenced by Cassie being there. So I'm not saying that this book doesn't do anything with Cassie. It does, it really does. But her actions largely play into how Jake operates. So we see at the start that Jake is getting frustrated because people aren't listening. And then we hear from Toby that the parents who are living with them now didn't do a very good job either, and they would be dead too. So let's just cover the context of this. The Animorphs and the parents are now living with the Hawk-Bajir as of the last book. So this is the first time where we come into a book and this big group is together. So you've got the Animorphs, the parents, and the Hawk-Bajir. And the first half of this book, which I bloody loved, was just focusing on the interactions and how things are operating within that bigger group and the leadership struggles that arise from that. The parents, much like Richard Carpenter in book 47, they haven't quite got it yet. For example, Naomi, the ultimate Karen, keeps running off and the Hork-Bajir guards have to bring her back and she's like, oh, I'm going to lawyer this and lawyer that at you. Like, she doesn't get it. She's trying to run off. But they say to her repeatedly, no, stop this. You're going to get us killed. And Rachel lays into her. Cassie's parents are there and they spend their time with the Hork-Bajir. And Michelle calls Cassie over and says, are you seeing this? And she's pointing at this cabin that the Hork-Bajir are building for their wounded, their elderly and their children. She says to Cassie, this structure is not right, it hasn't got the right ventilation, the right sanitation. And Cassie just says, so? The fuck's your point? Oh, they're not gonna survive in there. And Cassie's, well, it's not like they're going to be living in there forever. It's a temporary measure. And not only that, we're in a fucking war. So shut your goddamn mouth and get back to your job. And there's an interesting part where Michelle was saying, oh, an animal the size of a Hork-Bajir wouldn't... Cassie cuts her off and says, these aren't animals, nor are they big pets. You're treating them as if they have no ability to think for themselves. And yeah, it's just, the parents don't know what's going on. That's the message you're getting. They think this is all some weird game thing. The only exception, of course, being Marco's parents, because obviously Eva was Viso 1. So she's actually almost like the leader for the parents. They sort of look to her. But they all, like Naomi, expects Eva to do what Naomi wants. You know, the ultimate Karen. The Hork-Bajir are definitely the most capable group. Now, when I say that, I mean, the parents don't have a fucking clue what's going on. The Animorphs are struggling to get their grips on anything. And Jake, as the leader of the group, is falling apart. And the Hork-Bajir are just doing what they need to do. No complaints. They're just sort of walking around the Animorphs and the parents, getting their jobs done, and then staying back when everything falls apart for them. And you do wonder how Toby Hammy is feeling through all this, because these new groups have come in and are just causing chaos. The Hork-Bajir, you know, full credit to them, they're just getting on with the job. But that is a problem for Jake. The biggest thing for Jake in this book, and I've covered it before, but now it's coming to a head, he's losing control of everything. The Hork-Bajir look to Toby. Toby's got everything. Bish bash bollop. Everything's in working order. The Hork-Bajir working hard, getting their training done, getting things built. And as far as we can tell, they're doing a pretty good job of it. The parents, though, complete waste of space, really. And the Animorphs are failing. Jake is getting very, very frustrated with everything that's going on. And it's happened in the last few books where people are just not listening to him anymore. The other Animorphs, Tobias in the last book, Axe in book 46. And in this book, Cassie. Jake is now in a position to be in control of all of these people. He takes control of the parents because Eva looks to him and those parents look to Eva. And he's taking control of the Hork-Bajir because the Hork-Bajir look to Toby, who has pledged her allegiance to Jake, presumably following what happened in book 47, because we never actually got that confirmation from her, but since then she's just sort of followed behind him. She's like his advisor. But the Hork-Bajir follow her. So Jake is the figurehead of all of this big unit. Not only that, but Jake has effectively lost his family, which is obviously going to have a big psychological pull on him. And I think part of the reason Jake acts like he does in the first half of this book is because of the sort of mindset we saw happening in book 41. Remember that? He's got the abort button and he's got Cassie. Which one does he save? Effectively now, the Cassie option has gone. His family has gone and he's losing control of the other Animorphs. He's becoming distant from them. His only option now is the big abort button. So he's got this in his head. He's got this massive group around him that are suddenly following him. And he has this underlying subconscious knowledge that eventually he's going to slap that abort button. And he doesn't know how many of those people around him are going to end up dead. That's what's playing in the back of his mind. And that's why he's crumbling. He can't handle that pressure, despite all the stuff he's done as leader, all the horrible things. Is he ready to take that next step and do something that many would consider unethical? That's what's causing Jake to look so tired and haggard, and why he's snapping and biting. Not literally, of course. And Jake eventually breaks. Jake says, I'm not doing this anymore. And he walks off, and Cassie's following him, trying to convince him, trying to do the Cassie role, essentially, to bring him back from the fray, but it doesn't seem to work. So she comes up with another plan, and she calls an emergency meeting. So a whole camp gathers around a campfire in the middle of the night, and I like how they describe that they've got a dampener above this fire just in case something came over, so they could quickly get rid of this fire. And then Toby, when they're all sat down and nobody's saying anything, she says to Jake, what's this meeting all about? And Jake clearly is flustered by this. I didn't call this meeting. Cassie says, I called it. She knows that all this stuff has been going on, and she's brought them all together to essentially find that central focus point. What they all need to do, they all need to come together. And it's a way for them to say Jake is the leader, to give Jake that, what's the right word? To convince him that he is in fact in control, because he feels that everything else is being taken out of his hands. So this is Cassie getting everyone together to effectively raise their hands and say, Jake, you're the leader, you are in control, there's no mistaking that. And they do that. And Jake, at first, he doesn't seem to know how to take it. Walter, Cassie's father, comes over and gives him that convincing motivational word. And Jake's on the verge of just collapsing. And everyone's just waiting there with bated breath. But eventually straightens his posture and says, okay, yes, I'm in charge. And we're going to do this. Fantastic scene. A lot of atmosphere. Great tension in there as well. Some great character interaction throughout the entire camp. And just picturing it in my head, everyone just huddled around this fire, looking at Jake while he's on the verge of either bang or maintaining, essentially. Absolutely fantastic. So I believe it's the next day. The Animorphs come into a little secretive meeting and say, right, what are we going to do? It's time, they agree. If the Animorphs get wiped out, then that's it. The resistance is over. They are now living in secrecy. They have no longer families to protect out there, so they don't have to worry about that. It's time to recruit new Animorphs. So they have a discussion on who they want. They say no to the Hawk-Bajir, no to the parents, and then they think, adults in general probably won't believe this. We need to go for somebody who's a little more imaginative. So they think, kids, how do we know if they're controllers or not? And they come to the conclusion that the Yerks, because they're arses, don't like disabled kids and wouldn't take them as hosts. So the Cassie, it turns out, says, why don't we do disabled kids? Because the Yerks won't take them. She instantly regrets saying it. She was thinking out loud, and yes, she regrets it. But they essentially agree on it. Yes, they won't be yerked. They'll have a good chance of joining us. Why not give it a try? So the Animorphs agree to do that. And on their first mission out, they go to a rehab centre, Jake, Marco and Cassie, and they proceed into the town where they're going to go straight to this rehab centre. But Jake says we're not going to take a straight path, we're going to go on a bit of a detour, which was very strange. And he took them in behind a bunch of shops, got them back into their human bodies, and walked out in front of this bike shop. Now this is my first note on the thing, really. There's a bunch of bikes and some of them are just unlocked, so you can just drive them away. Now, forgive me, but these days I'm pretty sure you wouldn't expect to find that anything unlocked just for people to walk up and take. But yeah, apparently these shop owners have just left these bikes unlocked. And so the animals jump, the three animals, jump on these bikes, and suddenly, I'll read it, they get on the bikes and then, Andalites, rebels, choo choo! 3 human controllers came bursting out of the bicycle shop. Dracon beams singed my hair. Okay, this is the first part of the book where I'm just saying, what the fuck is happening here? Okay. So firstly, and this is the most minor point, the controllers can't shoot for shit. Again. They've had apparently they've had quite a while to look at them out the window and aim and all that. Secondly, why are they shouting Andalites when the Yerks at this point know that they're humans? Thirdly, how do they know that these aren't just 3 local hoodlums and brutes taking these bikes? How do they know? I imagine that there's like those old time wanted posters. And the Yerks have said, right, it's this kid, this kid, this kid, and there. And print them on a poster and put that in every Yerk shop. So the Yerks are there just studying it right. The kid with the medium length brown hair, who's got the wise eyes. The Latino kid with the stupid smirk on his face. The blonde one who's dead behind the eyes. The black one whose clothing is covered in animal shit. And the bird. Right? I don't know. Maybe they'd studied hard and looked at these Animorphs' faces, and as soon as they saw these 3 kids out the window, they're like, it's you. But then why would they shout Andalites? Because they're not Andalites. So they obviously haven't done their research, which means they wouldn't recognise the kids. So any kids that would have come up and taken these bikes that were unlocked, begging to be stolen, any kid that came along, they'd just shout Andalite and start firing laser beams out the door and start chasing them down the street. I don't buy it, Kimberly Morris, I'm sorry. The Andalites cycle into an alley, and they end up in this alley where there's loads of back doors to shops. And just before they get captured, they dispose of the bikes, morph to cockroach and crawl under the door, and they end up in a storage room. Now, we're at the part of the book now where, this is the second half of the book, by the way, or what I'm calling the second half. The first half, as close to perfect as an Animorphs book has come. Now we're into the second half where it starts to go downhill a little bit. So yeah, conveniently enough, they end up in a costume shop. Conveniently enough, there's a group of kids in there that are going to the rehab centre. And conveniently enough, they're getting into costumes to go to the rehab centre to entertain the kids. Is this an Elemis trick? I don't fucking know. But they get in costume and they follow this group of mini actors or whatever, and they go to this rehab centre and they split off from that group and go to they go on the elevator, and there's this guy on the elevator, and conveniently enough, he says, the kids your age are on the 5th floor. Go say hello. And then he walks off. They get to this 5th floor, and what do you know? Just what we needed. I hope there weren't any plot holes to guide us here. Not plot holes, you know what I fucking mean. They get to meet a few of these disabled kids. I believe most of them are in wheelchairs. So you've got Timmy, Kelly, Colette. I think those are the main ones that they meet. But there's also Pedro, who's in his bed. And then there's also James. Now, James comes across as the leader, and Jake quickly peeks onto that. So they establish that he's the leader, and he goes off into a small room to sulk about, I don't know, he didn't get his porridge that morning. So he's gone off to sulk in the sulky room. And so the Animorphs go in there and start talking to him. Because previously with the other kids that are out in the main lobby area, they couldn't get through to them. They didn't quite know how to approach them. But now that they've got the leader, who they think the others will listen to, they decide, right, he's the one we're going to talk to first. James listens to the animals tell this story, and he has no emotional reaction to it. He just sits there and watches them. And then eventually he says, "Fuck off, mate. I'm out of here. I want my porridge." But they stop him. They grab his wheelchair and say, "No, you're going to watch this." So Jake morphs Tiger, and then James is suddenly like, starting to convince me somewhat, yeah. And then they bring, no, it's Colette that comes in and sees the tiger. And they of course, they have to bring her, and I forget who else they brought in. But one by one, they're convincing these kids. They're sort of coming in like one by one and being convinced. And they have a big discussion, essentially, of whether they want to take on this responsibility or not. And it turns out that eventually they say yes. But there are conditions. So James says to Jake, "Right, we will join you, but Pedro, for example, gets the morphing power and he gets to turn into an animal so he can experience that freedom." So Jake says, "Yeah, of course." But Jake also says to James, "You must come back here because nobody is to know that you're missing." And they agree on that. That's the deal. Negotiation complete. Job done. And I just want to read one of the last lines of this chapter because it's incredibly subtle, but it's just underpinned with so much tension, because ever since book 46, and Raptor points this out when we talk about these books, he's always saying how Jake is interacting with Axe. Because remember when Axe conked him out and took on went by his own decision on aboard the USS George Washington. So they're talking about the hiring these kids, essentially, or recruiting them to be a part of this mission. And they're talking about VCOLs again. Axe nodded gravely. "Jake is the leader. He is my prince. I will trust his judgment." "Thanks, man," Jake said quietly. "That means a lot." And I read that, and I instantly thought, I pictured how Jake said it in my mind, in almost restrained bitterness. "Thanks, Axe, that means a lot." It doesn't feel sincere. It feels forced. And I love that. I love how Jake is just playing the role rather than actually feeling what he's saying. Because he knows when Axe says, "Jake is the leader, he is my prince, I will trust his judgment," that only counts up to the point where Axe doesn't trust his judgment anymore. And he's just going to knock him out and do what he wants. Jake knows that. And I just love the really, really underlying tension in that line. Brilliant. So the Animorphs then go back to the camp, and they decide to tell Toby what's been going on, because they haven't told her up to this point. They've sort of kept her out of it. Chapter 19 says, Before we left, Jake decided..." There should be a comma there. It's just one of those little grammatical errors. There should be a comma there. "Before we left, Jake decided it was time to tell Toby about our recent recruiting missions. Her reaction was hard to read." I like that, partly because I have read the fan fiction, The Earth Diary of Toby Hammy, which was written by Annie Jen. Fantastic Animorphs fan fiction writer. I suggest you go check her out. Yeah, I'm pretty sure, with a name like Jen, of course. I think the full name is Annie Jen 21, and I know that they're on fan fiction, but they wrote The Earth Diary of Toby Hammy, in which this particular moment this particular scenario is addressed really vividly from Toby Hammy's perspective. And so I read that, and the book says her emotions were hard to read. And I'm thinking of all the things that she went through while all this was going on in that particular fanfic. Fantastic fan fiction. I really, really recommend you reading that. Beautiful piece of work. The new Animorphs, led by James, have amassed a great big 17 I believe at this point 17 new recruits, all from this single place in the city or town. And the Animorphs want to continue doing it more. And to do that, they're going to go to a kids' home for a blind children's home. Kids who are blind, they're all blind. And so they want to go there. And so the Animorphs head out in a group of 6 this time. Toby's placed more guards back at home, which has allowed the Animorphs to go out on this mission as a group. And they go to this home for the blind kids. And they're going at the dead of night, essentially. I think it was the dead of night anyway. And they go into this room. And there's one girl who sits up. Of course, she can't see anything, but she hears them and starts asking who it is. So Jake and Rachel move over to this kid to talk to her. And apparently, while this is going on, Rachel is allowing herself to be acquired, her morph to be acquired by this kid. We don't know that till the end of the book. But the other Animorphs are there. Marco is providing backup by going gorilla, and Axe is there as well in his own Andalite body. And Cassie is sensing something wrong with all this. So they're in this dark room with beds lining the walls. It's very quiet. She thinks something's wrong. So she morphs to fly to get better vision, or a different type of vision to see what's going on. Well, she tried owl, but that didn't really work, so she went fly. And then suddenly, bang, in comes the door, because there are security cameras. And they must have been in there for quite a while. And maybe the Yeerks had cottoned on to this sort of thing going on, so they were keeping their eyes on security cameras in homes of disabled kids. And so these Hawkbajir come smashing in. And nobody's going to fire anything because of the kids. So the Animorphs immediately just surrender. And then in comes, guess who? Mr. Tom Berrison himself. Come on down. He comes in and walks up to Jake and says, "You are a little shit. Jake, you little twat." And clobbers him around the head. "You're coming with me, my laddo." And so Cassie, being in Flymorph, is the only one who's not being captured by the Yeerks. They take the Animorphs out. And of course, how convenient. Tom decides to speak openly. "I'll take them to the loading bay. It's, the third door on the right. If you wanted to crash the party, there's like a ramp on the outside of the building with the door. That's where you go in if you want to mess with our plans." So Cassie takes mental note of that. She morphs to Horned Owl, hence the owl on the front, and rushes off to the auxiliary Animorphs, which at this point aren't actually named the auxiliary Animorphs, but we're going to call them that because we all know that's who they are. And she goes in, flaps in, speaks to James. "Right, we need you now." He jumps out of bed. He's a great character, by the way, this James kid. He's definitely a leader. There's no mistaking that, and it's no surprise that Jake cottoned on right away, because he wants to be in charge. He wants to be that person who leads the others. And to be a leader, you have to be the one that wants to do that, and he clearly does. But he rounds up the others, and they've all got pigeon or red-tailed hawk morph, because from the last book we now know that you can acquire DNA from a Noflit, so that's canon now. And then, oh, by the way, at one point during this book, the Animorphs took the auxiliary Animorphs to the gardens and allowed them to morph bigger morphs. Just so you don't get confused. You've probably read this book anyway, so you probably know. It's just a ad-lib recap. It always has been. What are you complaining about, Medi Pillock? I mean, god damn it. Look at me in the eyes. Medi Wazzock. This is ad-lib, mate. Don't you dare start giving your bullshit to me. I'm sick and tired, Medi Wazzock, of your smart arsery. So you better put a sock in it, me laddo. You've been warned. Been warned. So this huge flock of pigeons and red-tailed hawks, Oh, but another thing I forgot to mention. So, James, for example, and two of the other disabled kids, when they demorphed after their first experience of morphing, they were fully healed. Fully healed. But the others are not, because their disabilities are genetic, so they returned to that form and they were still crippled, essentially. Just so you know that. But they fly to this facility, and of course, the third door from the left. So we go in that ramp there. That's where we're going to attack them. So they all come outside of this building and all get into battle morphs. So there's a crocodile, there's a bull, there's a bobcat. And James has got a lion morph, a male lion, big bushy mane. And Cassie makes sure to point out, oh, that was that was David's morph as well. I'm not sure what the messaging is there, or whether it's not actually message, it's just they wanted to make him a lion, which is fair enough, but it almost seems like they wanted to make a message out of this little bit here, put something subtle in there, worth a think about. Anyway, they get into this morph, and then two of these kids, one of them in a bull and one of them in an elephant, work to slam this door down. There are Hork-Bajir everywhere, and they launch in, and the battle begins. And it's a messy battle. Tom is there amidst this battle, holding the cube. So you'd think he's probably got the morphing power now, if he's anything like the bull from 39. Oh, I've got the power now. That's never mentioned, nor does he probably know, unless he got the whole reaction. There's this big battle that commences. I think the way it reads, there was only one Taxon that died throughout all of this. The rest of them were just having a bit of a play fight. You know, oh, I hit you. Oh, I hit you back. Oh, what good times we're having. Yeah, it seems quite tame in comparison to other fight scenes we've had, but I don't come to Animorphs for the fight scenes. I come for the character stuff, so I'm not that bothered, really. Eventually, the Visser turns up. He's got a brand new limousine, a brand spanking new limousine, but he's also got a couple of vans, which brings out more Hork-Bajir, more Taxons, but does it make a difference? No, not really. But he comes into this battle, has a bit of a tailblade fight with Axe, and then eventually decides to morph into a big tentacle monster, because we haven't seen any of them before. And then he's got Jake round the neck, and starts slamming him against the walls, fee, fi, fo, fuck. And of course, because he's Visser 1, he never finishes off his opponent, so Jake's all bloody and mangled, but he doesn't get finished off. And then suddenly, swipe, off comes one of these tentacle arms. Turns out that some of the Yerk Peace movement have infiltrated Visser 1's personal ranks. So one of these blue band Hork-Bajir, or multiple, are part of the Yerk Peace movement. And in all the confusion of who the fuck did that, Jake says, get out. And all these animals fly out into the, run out in, whatever, go out into the night. And not one of them has been killed, which, you know, stretches my belief quite, in fact, off a cliff, but whatever. Anyway, Jake asked, where's the cube? Turns out, Tom has it. Tom has run out into the night with the cube, taking it for himself. Whereas Yerk has anyway. And so Jake gives chase. Now Cassie, this is a big part of this, but this is the big part. Bigger than the stuff we've had so far, which quite frankly is already pretty big. This is the ultimate part of this book, and one of the ultimate parts of the series. Cassie thinks, if I let those two go off without giving chase, I'm going to lose Jake. Either Jake will be killed, and so he'll be dead, or he'll kill Tom, and the old Jake will be gone. So either way, I'm going to lose Jake. So she adds a third option, and she gives chase, and just as Jake is about to finish off Tom, she pounces in and attacks him, allowing Tom to escape. He's now got the cube. The cube has gone away. You're not with the Animorphs anymore, cube. In fact, we'll put the Yerk pool ship on top of that, because now the Yerks own it. And then we finish off the book. They return to camp, weary, tired, and fed up. The auxiliary Animorphs have clearly gone back to where their home. But the Animorphs have gone back to the Hork-Bajir camp. And Jake has basically refused to talk to Cassie. None of the other Animorphs, as far as we know, knows what has gone down. Whether they know that the morphing cube is gone, I'm not sure. But as of the end of this book, all we know is that Cassie and Jake know what went down that night after the battle. So Cassie comes up to Jake and tries to console him, much like she did earlier on in the book. But Jake is having none of it. He essentially says, "Fuck off." Finally, I decided to force the issue with Jake. Jake stared at me, his eyes cold and hard. "Well?" "Stop treating me like I'm the enemy," I said. Jake turned and began to stalk away. I trotted alongside him and grabbed his sleeve. He yanked it out of my grasp and faced me. His face was white with anger. His lips were shaking. "How could you do it?" he cried, his voice breaking. "Why?" I choked. "I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" His brows lifted in amazement. "How?" "You were wounded. He might have killed you." "Then why didn't you go after him?" Jake demanded. "You weren't hurt. With the trees for cover and the wolf's speed, you could have taken him down." I couldn't explain because I didn't understand it myself. All I knew was that letting Tom take the morphing cube had seemed absolutely the right thing to do, and something still told me I was right. Now, it's quite interesting, the little lie that Cassie tells here. You were wounded. He might have killed you. We can imply from what was going through her mind while this was going on that that's not why she went after him. This is incredibly interesting to me. That's the end of the book, by the way. That's how it finishes. Jake, up to this point, was unsure whether he had control. The whole start of the book where he essentially broke down and he told the other animals, "You take care of it," is because he felt he had no control. Cassie arranged a meeting to get everybody around to say, "Jake, you're the leader." And then what happens at the end of this mission? Jake is chasing Tom. He is taking an action that he has deemed necessary to take. And Cassie steps in, the one who arranged the meeting for them all to say, "Jake, you're the leader." She steps in and says, "No, Jake, you are not making this decision." Jake goes back to being, essentially saying no. Because the one person who was trying to convince him that he still had control just took it away from him again. That is huge for Jake. And this is all because of one thing that's been going on for basically the whole series. Jake and Cassie's relationship. They're in love. If they weren't in love, this would not have happened. Because when Jake made that decision, why did Cassie intervene? Was it because Jake was wounded? No. She said that to him, but while we were in her head while she was actually doing it, that was not her concern. Was it because she didn't want him to kill Tom? Not necessarily. Why did she intervene and take away his control? Because she didn't want to lose Jake. The Jake. Because she's in love with him. And this relationship has now come back to bite Jake. The relationship has stripped him of his last control. Oh, it's juicy. Now, this book brings about with it a lot of big questions. The obvious one, and I'll follow it along from what I've just been talking about, was Cassie right to do what she did? And the straight answer is there a right answer? She is fighting for the one that she loves. That's what she's doing. Remember book 41? I keep coming back to this because it was such an integral book, and I maintain that. When Jake was given that abort or Cassie, that's how we saw it from his perspective. But if it was reversed and Cassie was in that position with the big abort button and Jake clinging on for life, we now know what decision she would take. That's the main divergence of these characters, what separates them, what makes them different, and why they are now no longer compatible. Because he would go for the abort button and sacrifice the one that he loved. She would go for the one that she loved and avoid hitting that abort button, which would essentially save everyone. That's the main difference between these two. It's not an easy question, and I see a lot of people say, oh, Cassie is stupid, and that's why I hate her, because she ruined the war for everyone. And I think that's a very, very harsh way to look at it, because most of us are not cold, calculating creatures. We're social creatures, and that's one of the things that matters to us the most. Is what she did wrong in the sense of, we need to win this war and we'll do it by any means possible? Yes, from that perspective, she is wrong. But Cassie all along has been the character about principle and holding on to that last bit of humanity. And this is the climax of her whole storyline, coming to this point where she doesn't hit the abort button. She goes to save the one she loves. That's who she is. That's what this has all been building up to. It's a suitable ending for Cassie, but not only that, her ending brings about Jake's utter loss of who he is. And Kimberly Morris, fucking brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Another massive question, the big moral quandary of this book, aside from that ending. Bringing disabled kids into the Animorphs group. Why was there such hesitation about this decision? Because on the one hand, you could say, well, they gave them the choice. They could have said no. But what sort of choice is that? Say, for instance, I came up to you and I said, your best mate over there is about to be stabbed. And you can either pick up this gun and defend him, or you could do nothing. That's the sort of decision they put on these disabled kids who had nothing to do with this war. So either they're going to join the war, or they are going to live with guilt for the rest of their lives. And that feeling of, I could have done something. That's the choice they foisted upon these disabled kids of their age. And if you can't see the moral complexity with that, then you're not right in there. That is so morally questionable. And it's no wonder that Cassie questioned it, despite all the times that she's overcome these moral problems, like back in book 44, where she morphed the Hawkbudgear, and she used it as a way to, instead of just stealing this Hawkbudgear's body, allowing that Hawkbudgear's soul almost to do something good. This is a different question to that. This is forcing a life on somebody, forcing something horrible onto somebody without their permission. And they did it. Why did they do it? Because Jake told them to. Because Cassie gave Jake back his leadership role and said, you're in charge again. And they all said, Jake, you're in charge. So Jake said, he raised his posture and said, okay, I'm going to make the decision. And remember book 41? The abort button, the Cassie. Cassie is gone. Abort button. Jake's target is now the end of this war, that abort button. And so what does he see? We can have new recruits. That's good for the war. Moral implications, gone. Hit that button. And so they go through with it. And Cassie has allowed this to happen by giving him that leadership role, which she then took away again at the end of the book because she loved him. This book is not perfect, though. This book is not perfect, and I'll tell you why. The first half, great. Nothing wrong with it. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. The major problem with this book, there's two, and I've covered them as we've gone along. There's a lot of plot convenience, and you know I do not like plot convenience, and there's quite a lot of it in the second half of this book, I think you'll agree. Second point, the latter half, as I mentioned at the start of this book, was rushed. There was a lot of stuff that happened in this second half, but it was so bang, 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 that there was very little space for it to breathe. And so, for example, when Tom arrived, again, a bit of a plot convenience, but we're not talking about that now. When Tom arrived, it was so sudden, and their capture was so sudden, that it just didn't have any gravity to it. It just felt like another thing happening. It didn't feel like this is a big moment. It just felt like something trivial was happening. Because it had all been squeezed in, that you didn't get the impact of it. So a lot of those big moments in the sort of like the third quarter of this book, just didn't have the impact that it should have. What do I give this book for a score? Well, let's cover Jake's leadership. Wow. At the start of this book, he wanted to give up his leadership, but that wasn't him acting in a leadership role. That was interpersonal stuff going on. So that doesn't count towards it. He showed strength when surrounded by everybody to perk up and say, yes, I am taking control. So that's positive. He made the decision to go get the auxiliary Animorphs. The way he went about it was strange. The whole bicycle thing I thought was a bit unnecessary. But thanks to plot convenience, it worked out. But, you know, I'm not going to say plot convenience was a positive for his leadership. And then going into the room without checking if it had security or whether there were Hawk Virginia. And then obviously the part with Tom at the end, he was under control until Cassie got in the way, so that doesn't count. I'm going to give him a 5, just below average. As for the book, it's either a 9 or a 10. It's bordering 9 or 10. If it wasn't for the amazing amount of plot convenience in the third quarter, and if it weren't for the rushed Tom bits and a few other little bits in there, it would be a really solid 10. But yeah, there was, in about the middle, there are a few bits that let it down. It really is 9.9. No, it would be a 10 then, wouldn't it? It's like 9.5. It's like bang on 9. It's on the border of 9 and 10, and I cannot, for the life of me, decide whether I want to give it a 9 or a 10. I suppose the way I'm gushing over it, but then the plot conveniences. I gushed over it, didn't I? I gushed over it. And when I gush over a book, I give it that extra little bit. So it's a low 10. It's a very, very low 10. Okay? It's still a 10. Don't let that be taken away. It's a 10, but it's just about a 10. But a fantastic book, and I think a great addition to the Cassie line of books. Fantastic. Now, this would be the third 10 out of 10 in 4 books, but of course I'm going to have to go back to the return. I'm going to have to return to the return at some point to reevaluate that one. And I have the sneaky suspicion I might drop it a point or 2. I'm not sure yet. Hopefully not. But yeah, we'll get to that eventually. The next book is going to be The Absolute. Yes, The Absolute, book 51. We're getting so close to the end now. I'm really enjoying this run of books. It's really good. It's had its questionable moments, of course, but yeah, it's good. So this has been another review. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I shall see you next time. Ta-ra!